It's my pleasure to introduce you Alex Lee. He's a GIS analyst from Greenville Utilities, and he's going to be talking to us today about creating spatial views in ArcGIS. So Alex, you have it. Share your screen and
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm Alex Lee with Greenville Utilities, and we are in Greenville, North Carolina. So Greenville Utilities provides water, sewer, electric, gas services to the city of Greenville, as well as the surrounding areas. Greenville Utilities has more than 100 years of history. So some of you may know Ken of Highland Mapping, and he had a similar presentation a few years ago, and things has changed quite a bit in the past several years for ArcGIS. However, the basic concepts of spatial view is still the same. And so in this presentation, I'm more focused on the actual steps of creating spatial view. So what is a spatial view? A spatial view is a database view with a single spatial column. So by definition, a spatial view has at least one table that has a spatial attribute. In GIS, it's usually is a feature class. The spatial column usually is the shape attribute of the feature class. So a view is typically a subset of the feature class or a join between the feature class and a table. Okay, so again, go back to the spatial view. So I have two spatial views here. And so the first spatial view, the top one, is actually coming from a feature class, the gas service point feature class, and an inspection table. So some of us might heard about the query layer, and both of them have similar type of functions. And I personally never use query layer, so I'm not familiar with it. And but the difference is a spatial view act like a feature class in the ArcGIS. So why do we want to use a spatial view? And there are many use cases for using spatial view, but one of the most common one is to show one-to-many relationship. What it means is to show one feature relates to multiple records in a table. So on this slide, on the left is a feature class, looks like a house. The different colors show different records. So the green piece, the green polygon is one of the records of the feature class. It related to multiple records on the right, and those looks like little persons, people. Those are the records on the table. So you might think, why can we just join the feature class to the table? The problem is that when you use join, it only join to one records to the table. After the feature find the first match record, and then it stops. So in ArcMap, you usually need to use relate. But the problem is relate, you cannot symbolize for all the records on the table. So that's the reason we need to create a view. So now what type of tools do we need to create a spatial view? And we need to, of course, we need to need to have ArcGIS, and also we need to have the administrator right for the SDE, and also some knowledge of writing SQL statements. And it will be very helpful to have the SQL studios. It depends on what kind of database underneath the SDE. If you use SQL Server underneath, you might want to have the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. If you use Oracle underneath, you probably want to use the SQL Developer. So we can use the studios to test the SQL statement and make sure the SQL statement is correct. And of course, it will be helpful if I have more knowledge about the command lines of SDE or Python scriptings, but those are optional. So before we even create a spatial view, we need to make sure the feature class is ready. So on this slide, you can see if we have an older SDE, the shape field might be an integer field, and it won't work for an integer field. So you might want to make sure the shape field is geometry. So if it's an integer field, we need to run the migrate storage tool. And I have a link for this migrate storage tool on the last slide. So there's another thing to have to think about the feature class. If the feature class is versioned, registered versioned, and we may not be able to use that feature class directly. So, and then we need to create a version view first. So to create a version view, we need to run the enable SQL access command on the SDE environment. So after you run this command, and it will give you the view, the version view with the name ended with EVW. And the reason we need to do that is it hides all the delta tables of the versioned data. So now we are ready to create a spatial view. There are many ways to create a spatial view, and you can use an ARC catalog as I show on the screen here. And also you can use the command line to do the commands on the SDE server directly. Again, regardless of what method you use, the SQL statement have to be correct. So now we come to the SQL statement, and the typical SQL statement will be something like this. It will be like select object ID from a feature class, object ID from the table, and the shape of the feature class, and some other attributes from both the feature class and the table. And then it's from the feature class, and then join the table on a common ID. So here there's inner, left, outer, right, full joins, and I will explain that in a minute. So the SQL statement can be quite complicated. It depends on how many attributes you want to see in the view. And but the important part, as I highlighted in different color, and those are the most important components of the spatial views. So in this diagram, it explains when do you use inner, outer, full joint, left and right joint, and it depends on what kind of records do you want to see. Do you want to see the one match the feature class and the related table, they match each other, or do you want to see the ones don't match or partially match? Or so so again, and have to look at this diagram to figure out which one to use, and it really depends on what you want to see in the view. So of course, and writing the SQL statement can be a little bit challenging, and sometimes might want to use the spatial view construction graphic tool. And I think the SQL Studios, it has its built-in graphic tools to help you to build a SQL statement. So of course, after you write the SQL statement, you want to test it, run it in the SQL Studio and make sure there's no error. If there's an error, and when you build it in our catalog, it won't do it, and probably it won't give you much information what's wrong either. So it just won't build it. So now you can go back and to the ArcGIS catalog and build your spatial view. After the spatial view is built, and it's not done yet, we still have more work to do. And now we have to tell the SDE, now we have a spatial view, and this process is called the register with the geodatabase process. In this process, we need to tell the SDE which object ID to use. Is the object ID from the feature class or the object ID from the table, and or the object ID we created just for the view. And if we choose a different ID, different object IDs for the view, the behavior are totally different. So we have to carefully think about like which ID we want to use for the spatial view. And usually we use the object ID from the table. So of course, and we are almost there, but we have to do one more thing before we can use the spatial view. That's granting the permission for user to see and can use the spatial view. And in our case, we grant the permission to groups of people, different groups of people. And as I said earlier, I put some useful links here, and especially for how to use the migrate storage tool, and also enable SQL access tool, and also talk about which object ID we want to use when we register the spatial view. And so that's my presentation. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex. Let me open up the chat and see what we've got here.
Yes, all slides and recordings will be on our YouTube channel. So you will, just like the one that we had for the conference, you'll be able to watch all presentations again.
We've got some thank yous and good presentations. Does anybody have any questions? All right. Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. That was very technical, and I appreciate the references too. I'll definitely.
Wait a minute. There's one.
Okay.
I noticed you were building views using SD command line at version 10.3.
Mm-hmm. That's actually, that one is from Ken's presentation. And I think at that time, and that's probably the most efficient way to build a spatial view. So again, the ArcGIS has changed so much. And so of course we are at 10.8 now, probably later. And but the whole process is still very similar. And the most critical part is to write the correct SQL statement. And um, I cannot stress it enough and have to make sure it's correct. Otherwise, it won't work.
And he asked, are those commands still available in later versions? My understanding is they are not. And then Raleigh Myers asked, could you show a bit how having the views helps you?
Could you repeat the second question again?
Okay, the first one is, hold on, now I've lost it, Nancy. Okay, the first one is, are those commands still available in later versions than 10.3? Jim Sally's understanding is they are not. Do you know?
Yeah, I believe they are not available. Also, and I haven't used it for a long time, so I also believe those commands are not available anymore. But you are actually able to create those views, regardless spatial view or not. You can actually do it in the SQL Studio to create view there. And so the command, the syntax might be a little bit different from the SDE commands, but it's very, very similar. And you still have to select the attributes, object IDs, and all those things. And so the concept's still the same. So yeah, you're probably right. And the SDE commands may not be there anymore. And again, I haven't used it for a while.
Okay. Could you, Alex, show a bit how having the view helps you? That was from Raleigh Myers.
Okay, so so the view, what happened is the view, I don't have a slide to show, but the good thing of a view is that, yeah, the view here, as on the slide here, the view, it's behaved just like a feature class. So that's a very interesting function of a spatial view, because it's acting like a feature class. So you can do anything just like a feature class. You can symbolize it and selection and do some interesting stuff on the map. And so you don't have to think about it's related to a table. In our case, is like the fire hydrant. If you have one fire hydrant, and then you have to inspect your fire hydrant regularly, say once a year, and then you will have multiple inspection records of a fire hydrant, and some of them pass, some of them fail, and for the same fire hydrant. And so how do you show those on a map with different colors? And a spatial view will help you to do that, because every single records on the table become a point. And so you can just treat it like a feature class and do a lot of things. But there's one thing doesn't, maybe a little bit complicated, and you may not be able to edit the spatial view. And of course it's possible, but that's entirely different presentation about how to edit the spatial view. And so again, I think the biggest advantage for spatial view is behaves like a feature class. So that's the biggest advantage.
Adrian Rollins said cannot create metadata for a view. Tiffany Pewitt says views are usually used to represent data in view-only mode. Changes made to the parent FC will get transferred to the view through a job.
Yes, and that's totally correct. And usually we don't edit the spatial view directly. We normally edit the parent feature class or the table. And again, it is possible to edit the view, but the mechanism is still the same. Whenever you edit the view, the spatial view, the message or the information will transfer back to the parent table or parent feature class, and then do the editing there. But we can make that happen. Write some triggers and procedures to do that. But that's not. That's again. That's an entirely different presentation.
And then Riley Myers said that does help him conceptualize it. Kirsten Huntley says, I can't wait to try this. Thank you. And Lucian Stewart says, and if I'm butchering anybody's name, I apologize. I'm not the best. Do you have to refresh the view in order to see data changes following edits to the source data?
That's a very good question. Actually, we don't need to refresh the view. That's the good thing. Whenever you make any changes in the parent feature or the parent table, you can see the changes in the view immediately. There's no lagging time. And as a matter of fact, in our company, Greenville Utilities, we use spatial views to deploy the mobile apps. And so the field crews, they can see whatever changes on the parent tables, they can see it immediately in the field. So that's the good thing.
Lucian Stewart said, thank you. Very cool. Nancy?
All right. Any other questions before we take a break? All right. Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate it.